If you're a Pittsburgh baseball fan, then this is the podcast for you. Make your way down, grab a beverage, and get ready to talk Pirates with myself, Craig Toth, and Scott Jackson, two of the biggest fans you'll ever meet. This is Bucks in the Basement.
Now I see the changes in this town. They change, they say one thing, but then the next day it's different. They change, but they don't know what they want. All they do is change. Going left, going right, travel day, travel night. That's where we'll go. No excuses, no goodbyes, no one cries, no one lies. We'll never know.
I'm having a little bit of I guess it would be a spring training hangover. Wishing I was still down in Bradenton, Florida, but I am glad to be back talking to my good friend Scott at Pirate Takes. Scott, how you doing today, brother?
I'm good. It's finally getting a little warm up here. Next week should be nice. Not spring training in Bradenton nice, like you got a good feel for. But yeah, it's starting to feel like baseball season, and I'm excited to hear all about your trip.
Well, I did go to a couple games. I was down there, was on the backfields a little bit, was hoping to slide in another game there. Didn't work out with the scheduling with the delay with the game on Wednesday. Enjoyed everything mostly like a fan. Anybody that follows along on X knows that I was down there and going to the game, with the family. The first game I went to, all 12 of us were there. So a little bit hectic, two little ones. They're not so little anymore, but 8-year-olds running around and having fun and trying to do stuff. And the 13-year-old excited to see some of the players up close and personal, his first time at spring training, getting some cool things signed. An Andrew McCutchen card. Actually got Billy Cook to give him his game-worn batting gloves signed from the one day. So, I mean, believe me, he came back with a lot of stories, but we did watch a lot of baseball. I took it in kind of as a fan, as I always do. But as always, I mean, there's some things to take away from every single game. One of the first things that we kind of threw back and forth with each other was G1 Bay. G1 Bay is a guy that came into, 2023, and was making some highlight catches, hitting some dramatic home runs, played really well in the spring, wasn't able to put it together for a full season, but it kind of seems like the Pirates are giving him that run again, at least in the early goings of spring training. And he's producing. And I know spring training numbers don't matter, but you'd rather have good spring training numbers than bad, putting good contact, playing him in, multiple outfield positions, not just center field. So what's your thoughts kind of on Bay here, Scott?
Well, I think he's one of the guys that maybe was forgotten quite a bit in the off season. His name didn't come up a whole lot in all the things that I heard and read. He was kind of an afterthought. So that's what initially caused me to message you and say, "Boy, is Bay getting quite the look?" Because I think he was down on the depth chart for most of Pirates Twitter and social media, and even in the podcast world. But then just watching the game today, at one point he's hitting 585 in spring, and like you said, spring training numbers, as we saw with Kevin Newman, that's the go to example. Don't always mean anything, but it could. It could mean that he figured something out in the off season. You know, like you said, he'd rather have good numbers than bad, and it just helps his case to go north. Like we were talking beforehand, I think everybody has the assumption that maybe Palacios is on the inside track to make this team, but maybe he gets leapfrogged by Bay because Bay has that added benefit of the wheels. And if he can figure out how to steal and read these pitchers and get on base, even if it's just singles, he doesn't have to hit the walk-off home runs like he hit against the Astros. In fact, don't. Maybe try to play some of the wall, try to play the gaps, just swinging bunts even. Just get on base any way you can and make something happen, do some damage that way.
Yeah, and for him, I mean, that was, pretty much his calling card coming up through the minors was the speed and just the ability to get on base and to make contact with the ball. And even when you don't make contact or solid contact, that you are still able to, for the benefit of, your speed, to be able to get on base and then steal bases. He did that very successfully in the early goings of 2023. And then it kind of seemed like the whole Pirates team and their strategy and whatever they were doing was kind of found out all at once. It was like pulling back the curtain and, finding out, who the Wizard of Oz really is. But for me, I mean, with Bay, he definitely was. I mean, even us, I was pushing like maybe like, how Sawinski was hitting. Maybe they're looking for him, to be that platoon option. But I mean, right now, I mean, I think that, Ben Charrington, to a fault at times, will give players a little bit more run, give them a little bit more of a leash. We saw that with Rowdy Tellez last year. I mean, in the end of the season, it kind of worked out, but it's like almost like we see something in there and we don't want to give up on it. And especially for a guy that's performed in the majors, previously, you don't want to give away something where other players can't do what he does. I mean, Jack, for me, is a guy who also, has maybe a little bit of deceptive speed out there because you don't
Mhm.
think of him as a guy that will be stealing bases, but he's been doing that as well. Because if the Pirates aren't going to have that power, they are going to have to figure out a way to score and play a little bit of small ball. But yeah, I'm not really sure. There's so many guys that I see at this point in time as being on the bubble, and I'm not talking about the bubble for the 40 man. I'm talking about the bubble for the active roster, the 26 man. There's G1 Bay. There's Nick York, Billy Cook, Jack Sawinski, Josh Palacios. I mean, there's these guys. Obviously, Bay, plays the outfield positions. I think at this point in time, we know he probably doesn't play a very good second base. So that's where, like, a Billy Cook could kind of fit in there a little bit better. York can play some outfield, but he's more of, that utility infielder. Sawinski's obviously, simply an outfielder. Same with Palacios. But it's going to be very interesting on, all these moving parts, as the season progresses. And not just because he gave my son gloves. I did, look at Billy Cook a lot and some of his numbers and the way that he's approaching the plate. The guy has, I think, like maybe like 15 plate appearances, something, and has like 5 walks. Like he's just really just being very patient at the plate. I don't know if it's because he's not seeing a lot of, good pitches or, that's kind of like one of his calling cards. But yeah, I mean, this is such small sample size. I'm glad I'm not the one making, what I see as some fairly tough decisions, even if it is for the guy who is, 24, 25, or 26 on the opening day active roster.
Well, in today's Major League Baseball and the lineup flexibility and all the different lineups that get put out there and the days off that guys get, it's not like the last man in the roster in years gone by where he hardly ever plays, or those American League bench guys. It's just you never see get any time. It's different now, and so they use all 26 guys. So yeah, it is an important piece. It's not just somebody that you can carry some dead weight. Um, you can't just keep Bay only for speed anymore. You can't just have a speedster. to pinch run. You know, they have to contribute in other ways, and so it's nice to see that he's contributing in that way. You know, York, you know, learning some first base. That's another part of it. You know, with Spencer Horwitz, you know, he seems to be on a pretty good track for coming back, but still a hole that needs filled at the beginning. Yeah, there's some tough decisions to be made. But I guess the good news is too that that's not the roster you're locked in with. It's a long
Yeah.
season. Injuries happen, slumps happen, guys get hot in AAA. You know, it's good to have depth, and that's something that this organization hasn't had in quite some time is depth on the 40 man.
And depth at, kind of multiple positions. I mean, obviously first base continues to be, you know, the glaring need that was there. Hopefully, like you said, Horowitz comes back and is able to, fill that sooner rather than later. But realizing that, with him, having to have the surgery, that you don't really have that internal option. Where with other positions, I mean, there is a multitude of what I would see as being at least competent options or options with upside. I mean, York to me is a guy, he just makes contact. He's just a hitter. It's kind of refreshing to see because he reminds me of, we're talking about, like you're saying, back in the day, like he reminds me kind of like a player from back in the day before the, three true outcomes, the home run, the walk or the strikeout, is a guy that is just taking pitches that are given to him and driving them kind of where they take them. And to me, that's another thing. I mean, I think that, Nick Gonzalez has kind of become that type of player. I know that when he was drafted, had hit a lot of home runs, but, he hit them in New Mexico State.
Yeah.
He hit them in the air where, a lot more may go out. And so, I mean, even when he was, drafted, I think that people had even cautioned that maybe there may be some inflation in those numbers. Not that he didn't have any power, but maybe didn't have that eye popping power, that was seen on the stat sheet there. So I kind of like having those types of players. Scott, that's something we've talked about, multiple times on this show of, if you're not going to have power, you have to find other ways. If you can get the speed of Bay, if you can get the contact of, a York and a Gonzalez, the patience of the at the plate of a Cook, a guy who, I feel is probably, I mean, at this point in time, one of your best defensive outfielders, if not your best, a guy that can also play a little bit of first base. So, and that's, I mean, something that, I mean, I know that Pirates fans get frustrated at times with, but, and I can see it to a degree with certain players, but to have that versatility kind of in these lineups, I mean, obviously, back in the day, there would be, okay, here's your, lineup across the diamond, and that's where they're going to play every single day. I don't think that is today's baseball. And honestly, I mean, these things will work themselves out. We see, unfortunately, an injury to Brian Hayes opens the door for Jared Trillo at third base, which in turn, opens the door for Nick Gonzalez at second base.
Hmm.
I'm just wondering, we're talking about this, and then there's going to be tough decisions to be made in this little backup catcher battle that's kind of going on. I think that everybody assumes at this point in time Joey Bart is the starting catcher. The Pirates have never
Yeah.
said
Yeah.
anything that is, aside from that. But I mean, nobody really having a bad spring training behind the plate whatsoever. I mean, Jason DeLay is never going to be, the hitting type catcher. You're not really looking for that from him. He's more of the game caller, the defensive catcher, but all having a very, very solid spring so far.
And Jason Delay is not going to embarrass you at the plate either. He's just not going to light the world on fire. But Henry Davis has looked solid defensively. He's got the cannon for an arm. You know, he's hitting just under 300 this spring. So, but then again, think about spring that he had last year, and we talk about that all the time. How deceptive those numbers are. So you really just don't know. That's why you have to trust these coaches with the trained eye just to see what's going on in the cages, what's going on in those backfields like you visited, what's going on, where we don't necessarily see it and the mechanics of it. Something that has really caught my eye and something we talked about last week is the Key Brian Hayes switch in his swing and his follow through. And I think that that's paying dividends. Just the eye test of seeing how he's staying with the ball and going the other direction more of a throwback Key Brian than he was trying to pull everything last year and maybe a little more pop. So those little mechanical changes that the coaches see and that the coaches work on today. Tommy Pham, when he was mic'd up talking about his procedures and the working on the tee, those habits that he got from Albert Pujols, and whether or not people caught the f bomb that he dropped at the end of the that one inning, but saying going back to the tee because whatever he's been doing for the last 3-4 days just hasn't been working out for him, doesn't feel right. He's swinging through fastballs in the zone. You know, that's what's so fascinating to me, and that's why I would love to go to spring training sometime, just because I love drills. I love watching and seeing. Okay, what are they working on here? What are they developing here? How is this going to tweak things? And I would really be interested in watching Henry Davis at that kind of level and see what is he working on. How is he looking to go from what we saw last year, where he was pull happy and not quite getting there, to maybe using more of the field and becoming a more all around hitter, and using what the pitchers give to
Yeah, because I mean, honestly, I mean, Joey Bart is no, he's not great behind the plate. I didn't want to, speak too poor. He's not a good defensive catcher. I mean,
no
that's
Buster
not going to
Posey.
try to. Yeah, he's no Buster Posey. We're not trying to mince words. He's not a Pudge. He's not a Yadier Molina. There's some guys. He's no Austin Hedges behind the plate. I'll tell you that much for sure. But it's going to be the bat with him. With Henry, yeah, I mean, he definitely looks a lot smoother. I mean, we could even see it last year behind the plate, and even more this year, seeing him catch Jared Jones today, watching that game.
Mhm.
Uh, for me, with Henry, it's looking that he doesn't look like he's out of place back there. It's almost like, you're looking for that, if an offensive lineman, if his name gets called too many times in a football game, then more than likely he's doing something wrong. And it was the same thing, with Henry Davis coming up through the ranks, is just that, and just saw so many things that, he was, these little things that he wasn't doing. And he actually has turned himself into being, a catcher that I don't notice that he's back there. Like, I don't think that, he's, dropping balls, or he's, looks rigid, or looks, non-fluid. So, I mean, but with him, it's going to be the bat as well. Endy, obviously, I feel like is probably, just behind delay as far as, the defensive stuff goes. But once again, with Endy, the bat has been more of his calling card. Had a pretty good night, last night. But for me, that's where it's kind of going to be tough again, because if you have a guy who's your starting catcher, and I know that, Joey Bart, even when he did play a quote unquote full season last year, did, deal with some injuries, was a little bit nicked up at times, and, didn't get a full season of plate appearances. But even if he plays, the same amount that he played last year, I don't know exactly where all of these at bats are going to come from.
Yeah, well, that's the thing. We don't have the Yadier Molinas that are going to catch 162 games anymore. That's just not reasonable. But if Joey Bart is your starting catcher, what is he going to catch in a week? 4 or 5, probably not 6 games. But with Henry Davis being a 1-1 and still having high hopes for him, and of course we have high hopes for Endy, do you really want to pigeonhole these two guys that are potential stars for you and real producers? Do you want to pigeonhole them into a position where they're only going to start 2 days a week. Where delay, you feel comfortable. I feel comfortable with delay taking the spot behind the dish, 2 days a week, and I don't really wish for much more than that. Something's gone wrong or somebody got hurt if you're seeing much more than that from him. But where do you find those extra at bats for Endy, for Henry in the long term? Because backup catcher isn't really going to work when you have three guys that are producing.
Yeah, and I mean, I know that if they're all producing or they're all really playing well, whether it be at the major league level or AAA, it could be a it's a good problem to have.
Yeah.
But in the end, it's just my mind working as to how is this going to work itself out. I mean, obviously last year, Endy got injured before the season. Henry kind of fell off a cliff at the plate. Uh, you had Osmani Grandal at the time not starting the season, so you kind of end up with Joey Bart. But he's done nothing to show that he's not going to be in that position to at least get the majority of games behind the plate. If there's no injury. So that's where I mean this it's a very weird situation. I know people are saying because I mean it's like Bart's your starter and then Endy's your second best catcher, so then he's your backup. And that's not really kind of like how baseball works to a degree, unless they have position flexibility, which we do know that Endy has. But the Pirates, as we've talked about previously, are saying, for the time being, he is strictly a catcher. Henry Davis, I mean, there's been no inklings of moving them to different positions. I know that we've had conversations in the background about the fact that, in my eyes, Joey Bart at some point in time, it may be smart to make that move out to first base. People calling for it right now and just saying, well, these guys are both performing really well, so just move Bart out to first base. Bart's never played first base for a single second in his entire professional career and collegiate career. So that who knows if he can even play first base? Do I think he can? Yeah, probably, but it's not really the type of move you make now. And I think that's what's kind of getting frustrating for Pirates fans right now to a degree is they're like saying, well, IKF isn't going to be the long term answer, so just move Nick Gonzalez over there because we want to maybe get Nick York into second base. And yeah, that might be the goal in the long term. And the same thing with Bart. But for right now, it's dealing with the situation and kind of what the Pirates are showing you. The Pirates have shown us nothing this offseason. I mean, they even said, I believe it was either during Pirates Fest or after that, IKF's our shortstop. Like they've
Hmm.
never kind of moved off of that. You know, Bart's the catcher, not really, moving off of that. So, and saying that, Endy's staying behind there. Henry, who's played, not great outfield, but has played the outfield before, he's catching right now. So it's, I'd like to kind of go to that hypothetical land at in some ways, like to a certain degree. But the way that things are playing out right now, I think that Endy could have an unbelievably strong spring, and to the dismay and probably to the ire, and I mean we'll hear about it on X. Could be starting out in AAA, and maybe Henry as well, just to be able to get them at bats. But even down there, it's the thing that we've talked about years back. Once they are both on the same team, like how did those reps get split up?
Yeah, I maybe you play the hot hand, but maybe you split it up evenly. Something that we bring up on occasion, as much as we love them, in the on the major league roster, that DH position is taken. And so I think in AAA you could potentially have some more flexibility there of getting guys at bats and kind of keeping their legs fresh behind the dish. But yeah, that's another piece of this whole thing is that as much as we love him and as much as he produced last year, Andrew McCutchen doesn't have the flexibility to play the outfield anymore on a regular basis. And so you want him in the lineup because he does hit 20 home runs and have a good batting average and everything, and that spark plug for the team. Um, but at what point is he kind of clogging things up at DH? And and because he produces, it's not that that's probably the wrong wording to use, but it could potentially happen, and it lessens the flexibility in some of the options when you have these guys playing multiple positions, and you have so many guys I've said it all off season. That is one of the best things that could happen this year is if somebody steps up and makes Andrew McCutchen expendable towards the end of the year to lessen his at bats. That just means for the future you have somebody that stepped up and means a brighter future for the organization.
And even though you want the team to be successful in 2025, I mean, that's something that we all want to happen. You want to set the team up for success in 2026 and 2027. I mean, you have a lot of these guys, and, many of the ones that we're mentioning, they have a lot of team control. They have a lot of time that they can be, Pittsburgh Pirates. It's not, limitless, but it's not just this year. And if it doesn't, kind of work itself out this year, doesn't mean that, it won't eventually work itself out. And it could be a good problem to have, to a certain degree. Just because, I mean, with Kutch, how many more years can he play? Uh, how long can he, have the seasons that he's been having? If he's having them, it's kind of like almost a bonus at this point in time. I mean, I've been calling, and I know that people say never doubt Kutch. I mean, there was at least a few times that I've kind of said that, he's eventually, not going to finish the season, and then he proves us all wrong, and he absolutely does. I mean, it would obviously make it a lot easier if they had that flexibility, that position, especially since you're probably going to give, Brian Reynolds' legs a rest, O'Neill Cruz's, legs a rest. And if they're hitting hot, then they're going to be in the DH role. But then also, this kind of works into, having an abundance of pitching and being able to make moves to bring in, a Nick York, to bring in a Billy Cook, to bring in, what we hope Spencer Horwitz will become. Well, if you get a lot of these guys that are hitting well and they hit well for, more than one season, I mean, even at the AAA level, even if Henry Davis goes down and starts knocking the cover off the ball, and but you have Endy who's hitting well, and you have, Bart that continues to hit well. I mean, that's kind of what teams may be looking for if they're looking for a certain position. We saw it with the Marlins last year with Jazz Chisholm. They were looking for a, maybe more advanced, a I don't know if it was higher regarded prospect at that point in time, but closer to the majors catcher. And they were able to kind of pull off a deal. On the Pirates end, that might have been some money, holding things up. But yeah, if you can get an abundance of hitters, then you can also still make moves. So it wouldn't be a bad thing. It's just my mind thinking of, how does this work itself out?
Yeah, I mean that's something in the past that we haven't really seen is, um, an abundance of hitters and guys really taking the reins and grabbing that brass ring and hopefully, but like you said, we want everybody to be successful for 25, 26. But looking longer term, and that's what we're starting to see, maybe the building blocks of the organization going forward, guys that have 6 years of control, 5 years of control. That's going to be that next step. The Cooks and the Yorks and the Horowitz, and hopefully those guys step up and they can ease our worries and keep that window open that much longer. But yeah, this isn't just a one and done kind of thing. That's a tricky part of Charrington's job. He has to balance with the win now with how are we going to win 3 years from now, and keep my job for that amount of time. And yeah, so it's a balancing act. But I think of course, it's the Pirates' luck, and it's the fans' luck of the Pirates that pitching when you have an abundance of pitching, it's harder to part with that because that's harder to develop and keep healthy is probably the biggest thing. You mentioned the Marlins. Think about how we thought the Marlins were so set with pitching, and then a rash of injuries happen, and boom, they're down where they don't have anything. So hitting doesn't tend to happen the same kind of way. So, man, they seem like everything is real deep. And like we were saying, Jason Mackey projecting what he thinks that Indy's rotation is going to look like and how strong that rotation looks. But man, a few injuries on the major league roster, a few veterans, have topped out and they're not performing like you hope. And you pull from AAA, and before you know it, you don't have anywhere else to go. So we'll be happy, I think, that we didn't trade too much of this abundance of arms for a bat when there's talent there that just needs unlocked, and hopefully it can get unlocked. And hopefully, really, Bob Nutting will open up the wallet, and that'll be the key to things. Because yeah, the good foundation. That's what I've always said is, you in a position like Pittsburgh, you spend money to make a good team great. You don't, spend the money to make a bad team okay. It doesn't benefit you that same kind of way. So we're in a position where we get this foundation laid, and maybe we can catch lightning in a bottle this year. Maybe they can contend and surprise some people, but really show that the talent is there, so they can take that next step. And maybe next offseason, the big move isn't Tommy Pham.
Yeah, and you're talking about two different things, and I could go to one of the two things and topics we discussed, before we hopped on here. The first way I would go is, looking for the long term. And for me, Konnor Griffin was somebody who impressed me when I was down there and did not have like the best days or performance in the time that I was down there and I saw. I mean, obviously, had some hits prior to that. Had a couple strikeouts in the one game that I went to. But the one thing that I saw is that the stage was not too big for this kid. And I'm not talking about just because he's an absolute tank, because seeing him in person, I mean, I saw the numbers as to how big he was, the 6'4", 250, like just, a large human. No, he's a big guy, but playing, his first stint of or glimpse at professional ball. Obviously it played some instructs last fall, but this is actually stepping on to a field with, Major League Baseball players and guys that are at least, vying for major league teams. And to me, that was like the thing that stuck out the most about him is that it was never a bad at bat. The situation never looked too big for him, and that he looks like, number one, that the tools are there. I mean, it just needs to, kind of follow through and come through. But then also that I don't see him being a person that's going to get, too far down or too far up, that he's kind of like an even keeled, type of kid. And yeah, I mean, just we could have, and that's like a knock on wood type of thing, you know, one of the first like legit hitting prospects that we've had in the system. And like, I'm talking like the one that will be ranked, towards the top of a lot of prospect rankings in a long time.
Yeah, imagine that jumping from high school to being on the field with major leaguers and then going deep. He hit a home run, and it
Yeah.
just, and even before that, it was when I was sick. Was it like Saturday or Sunday that week where he, hit the ball the other way, and scored a run, went to third, took the extra base, when the time was right. Really had a strong head on his shoulders, like you said. Didn't let the moment overpower him. Looked like he belonged, and that's saying a lot for an 18-year-old.
Yeah, I'm excited for the minor league season for him, wherever he may start out. I mean, I've heard projections from people the whole way from the Florida Complex League to Greensboro. And so, like, to me, doesn't matter, especially in his first year of pro ball, exactly where he gets placed. Um, because I think that he'll know if it's the right place for him. I think that, and if he starts to, perform very well at that level, I think that, the Pirates, they've shown that they will be aggressive with placements at times. But you don't also want to, put him into a situation where it could be a little bit overwhelming. Like I said, I don't think that that would be the case with him. But I mean, no matter where he goes, that's going to be really exciting. But the other direction you were pointing me, and not to cut short on Konnor, because I could talk about him, for a full hour here probably, is that, you never know when these injuries and players that at least fans, some members of the media, and whoever it may be are counting on, where there can be injuries, where there could be setbacks. I mean, last season, we were counting on Ryan Baracki and Dowry Moretta, in the bullpen in our minds to a degree, and then both of them going down. Uh, we've talked about Johan Oviedo, at length. Obviously, this new injury, kind of creeping up, possibly caused, you never know, by maybe a little bit of overcompensation, whether it may be these types of injuries, unfortunately, with a player that had, the type of injury that he had, the Tommy John, there's other injuries that pop up because in baseball, everything in the mechanics is related. Some of these guys end up getting hip, you know, quad, whatever it may be. In Oviedo's case, it's the lat, and he's kind of shut down for at least 4 weeks here until they get some, images redone here. That is it's a blow. I mean, I'm not going to say that it's not a blow. My expectations for Oviedo, and I've put this out very clearly, was capping out at the most part at 80 innings, and playing maybe a long relief role at some point, getting played back slowly. But for the people who at the beginning of this offseason and even towards spring training were talking about him as the fifth starter, in the rotation, that would be, to that case would be even more of a blow. But you do have to fill innings. You were hoping that he would come through healthy, through this rehab and pitch as many innings as he could to get to the end of the season. But as of right now, I think that's the big hit for me in my mind, is that, we don't know where it goes from here. They're talking about the weighted balls at 6 weeks at the earliest. You're looking at, and that's the beginning of the throwing program. So, not really sure what the timetable for him to return would be. And that's, that's more of a blow, because I was talking about him building innings to then build back into next year. Because, like I said, we're looking towards 2025, 2026 and beyond, with him. But yeah, that's where it goes to my mind, is that, yeah, it definitely is a blow. I wasn't counting on Oviedo as much as some, but it's obviously not a good thing to hear this.
Yeah, I think we've been pretty consistent about it's how Oviedo ends his season as opposed to how he starts it. So if he can now, yeah, the hopes of how many innings he can get throughout the season to then build for the following year, not overstress his arm in 26. That does take a blow, but he's going to be a part of this team. The plans for a few more years at least. So getting him right and not overworking that arm and making sure we do this the right way is going to be top priority. So seeing him at the end of the year and finishing out a season strong has to be the top priority now. So yeah, it's going to be a longer road than we had hoped. But I don't think that, I had mentioned before that him on the 60-day isn't the worst thing for his Tommy John, but I didn't want it to happen this way with another injury that causes things to go back. I thought, extending his rehab and really taking things slow because of the importance that he is to the franchise was the way to go. But yeah, this isn't the way to go about it. With adding an extra injury that is going to cause a problem. And like you said, things can be tied in mechanically, but also between the ears. That's a major injury to your livelihood. The piece of your body that gives you your livelihood and could potentially give you generational wealth. There's an injury there. That's got to play with your psychology quite a bit.
Yeah, absolutely. And like I said, I we've been you said talking about making it towards the end of the season and being as much of a contributor as he can be, and hopefully this is something that will just be a slight setback and can move on from that. But yeah, just when you hear like completely shut down from a throwing program and different types of stuff, and then restarting the throwing program, so you don't know how soon he goes from weighted balls to then throwing at a distance to then getting back on a mound and then building back up to even getting to the live at bats that he had made his way back to and hadn't even made himself back into games yet. We'll see how that works, throughout this season. But I mean, that's why there is this depth. That's why you go out and get, an Andrew Heaney, something that we kind of advocated for, not Andrew Heaney himself, but just getting more depth in the pitching department, not pushing, Bubba too quickly, even with a Harrington, a Burrows, an Ashcraft, whatever it may be, and just keeping to stockpile arms, which makes me laugh to a degree. I mean, getting off of like a fairly depressing subject, but subject of having another left-hander for the bullpen, which is kind of crazy because I can remember all the days. It was so long ago when Joey Wentz was the only left-hander in the bullpen, and now there are 5 left-handed options in the bullpen. Obviously, I don't think they're taking all 5 up north. They would be crazy to. But now with Ryan Baracchi coming in on a minor league deal, you have Joey Wentz on the 40-man, acquiring Caleb Ferguson, Tim Meza, and now Justin Lawrence, the guy with a very unique arm slot, a pretty specific skill set, a sweeper and a sinker. I know they talked about him adding the four seamer, but a guy that has had success a couple years ago in Colorado did not, perform as well this season. But I mean, not a bad waiver claim to make, whatsoever. I mean, that was kind of weird to me that Colorado just, I mean, I know he had a bad season last season, and then they're just like, oh, we're just going to kind of put him on waivers to see what happens. I did see it was reported over at Robert Murray from Fansided that it was a possibility that the Pirates to try to get something done for him earlier, in the offseason to try to bring him over to the Pirates. Well, I mean, at this point in time, they put him on waivers. Obviously, if you were trying to get him before and you can get him just off of waivers, you're going to take a shot at that. But yeah, now we have 5 guys fighting for what normally would be 2 spots, maybe at most 3, depending on what they see, Ferguson's role as. But yeah, I mean, they've got a plethora of lefties to choose from at this point in time.
And Lawrence is a guy that not just has had success, but success closing games. He's got ninth inning experience. Last year wasn't great. Negative 1.7 B WAR. This is 6.49 ERA in 59 and 2/3 innings pitched. But the year before, 3.72 ERA. The number breakdowns that I saw showed that Coors was his kryptonite. That he performed quite well outside of Coors. So 11 saves in 23, 75 innings pitched. I mean, diamond in the rough. These are the kind of deals that we talked about, guys needing to hit on these. And we were talking more position players, but the bullpen being such a weak position, it's now. Well, I don't want to jinx it. Like maybe we did last year and say it's an asset. I'm not going to say it's a top 3 bullpen, but you have increased options, especially lefty. Like, he's not a Aroldis Chapman, but maybe he's somebody that can be a stopper at certain points as a lefty. put us in a better position to win games. And also, isn't he making less than $1 million this year? I think his ARB was like what 945 or something like that, something around that neighborhood. So it wasn't an expensive pickup. I think it's a low risk, high potential kind of move. And yeah, if Oviedo's going to go down, that created a spot for this. They could work out.
Yeah, absolutely. And bringing up like Chapman and giving him that, $10.5 million, and he was really really good at times last year, really really bad at times last year. But it was also, like I talked about before, the injuries to Moretta, the Baraki, Holderman, being sick and injured at the beginning of the season, Majinski injured at the beginning of the season, and once you have all of that type of stuff pile up and you're committing that much to just one player
Yeah,
within the bullpen, I mean, he pretty much has gone the complete opposite direction. By he, I mean Ben Cherington has, okay, instead of giving one guy that much money, let's just throw, that much money and put it with a bunch of different guys and show some depth there, which to me is that's kind of the way bullpens have always been built. I mean, a lot of this is going to depend to a degree. Obviously, everybody knows on Bednar coming back to at least somewhat or closer to that all-star form from the previous couple of seasons before last year. But I mean, even if he doesn't get back to there, to not be as, I mean, dramatically bad as he was last year at times. 7 blown saves, But yeah, I mean, I can't disagree with the way that he's done that. Obviously, we'd hope he'd fill in with the money that he maybe quote unquote saved on those lower end deals here with the relievers to go out and do more. But I can't really argue with that. Can't argue with the Heaney coming in. A lot of innings have to be filled by pitchers. But yeah, Justin Lawrence, a nice little, like you said, it's a low risk, high reward potential. And that's kind of what, even like a Tim Mesa was, hoping Ryan Baraki can get back to what he was a couple years ago when he was healthy. But yeah, I just thought it was kind of weird that having no lefties to having like all the lefties.